Okay, sounds good. So let's probably just start up with the fact that the app settings JSON is like every JSON file divided into kind of sections. You probably I try to quickly find an editor that allows me to fold a bit clearer, but this editor already allows it, so I could just fold down these sections, and that will probably make it a bit clearer. So everything that is between these curly braces, is kind of a section that works on its own. And the app settings JSON file is divided into those sections. The general and the market sections are kind of special. I'm just coming back to that in a minute. And all the other settings are pair-based configuration settings, all the other sections, I mean. So we're coming to that then too, but you basically can say everything that isn't general and market conditions is pair-based configuration. So we're just using the default config, by the way, here. We can extend that later to show you a few more details, but this is what the basic configuration looks like that comes with PDFeeder when you download it. I just got the today's version, the 1.4.0.431, so this is the actual one we're having here. The general section kind of lays out the basics, and everything that comes below adds up to that. So it's kind of, let's call it modifier sections. What PDFeeder does, and I mean, most of you probably know that already, is kind of calculating a target configuration, a profit trailer configuration out of values you give it, combined with things, that information that Feeder pulls from exchanges and from the market. As I just see the question, what the default setting configuration is designed for, that's a good question at this point, because that's something I wanted to say anyway. The configuration that comes with Feeder isn't in any way meant to just run out of the box. You're good to use it as a base for your own modifications, but you shouldn't just download Feeder, start it, and let it run on your exchange and trade with that configuration. You should always go through everything and understand what's going on. What that editor is, it's actually code. It's a short name. It's Visual Studio Code from Microsoft. It's available, I guess, for all major operating systems. So this is on a Mac here, but definitely runs on Windows and Linux too. Kind of a cool editor. I'm not a big Microsoft fan and not a Windows fan at all, but that's a cool piece of software. Works quite well. I could even switch from JSON format to JSON with comments, then the silly comment underlining goes away. Like I said, basic configuration, good as a starter configuration, but starter configuration means not just run it, but use it as a base for your own modifications. So please, not just run it, but think about what will be best for you. So this is the layout. JSON file separates into sections. This general section is the first we're going to talk about, and Jared, probably this could be a part that you could walk our guys through. Do you think?
Sure. We can do it line by line, I guess.
Yeah, probably best.
So I mean, basically, just understand that this general is it's your base. It's what everything else gets offset from. So whatever you set here is the starting of your calculations, which makes sense because it's on the top, right? Your base currency can be whatever you want if it's a tradable currency. Obviously, most people use Bitcoin, but you can use ETH or USDT if you're evil. So basically, that's your base pair, your base trading pair. The buy strategy, those are, before I go too far, a lot of these obviously are being pulled from the PT wiki. So if you're confused about, one piece or another, it is kind of a pain to have to look at both wikis, but, there's really nothing here telling you, hey, this is a feeder specific config, or if this is a trailer kind of a thing. Usually if it says all next to it, that's referencing the profit trailer variable. So if you had a question about that, jump back over to the PT wiki and take a look. So point being, that's where all the buy strategies are going to be listed, all the different various ones you can use. Currently, it looks like you can use lots of buy strategies, not so much on the sell side. Not really sure why that is. It's probably I don't know if that's a coding restriction or if this just hasn't been gotten to yet. But anyway, lots of versions, lots of ways to buy, a couple ways to sell. The next line, the buy value. So that is either an absolute, oh no, I'm sorry, that's cost. Buy value is going to be the trigger for your buy strategy. So typically that's a percentage value. So if it's the low BB, it's your low BB line at 15% above the low BB because it's a positive integer. If you have questions about low BB, there's quite a few resources out there. The trailer crew made some. I made some. I think Gnome made some. It's been documented as well. It's really not that complicated as long as you understand what that number really means. What is 15, right? So as long as you know how that works, the rest of it's kind of self-explanatory.
Yeah,
You have any
I
questions?
might also add we have the indicators for the main buy strategy
Good call.
on botindicators.com. We definitely have low BB, high BB, EMA spread, SMA spread, and the gains, EMA gain and SMA gain. But we will have the remaining ones too, like EMA cross and what else is missing? I don't even
Well,
remember, but that
the
should be the most important ones, I guess.
I got a message from Squiggles, I think his name is. He's actually got some that incorporated trailing as well, so that's kind of cool. I haven't put them in yet, but I have the strategy text. We can play with that and take a look.
Yeah.
Anyway, I mean, trailing's kind of weird, right? Because you never really know if those are going to hit or not, and that's hard to do back testing and prediction and all of that. But it's nice to at least be able to see what it should be or what the possibility is there. And for a lot of people, I know you're visual, and those TV indicators are really, really cool to just have that visual look. I mean, you can kind of see it in your head, but when you start tinkering with numbers and buy strategies and looking back over charts, it does make it a lot easier to kind of get a feel for where you want to be and what kind of attack you want to have. And that's getting more into strategy and stuff. We can do those later. We're just kind of going over what these actually are. Max cost, source of a lot of headache, mainly because people don't, well, I shouldn't say all people, but it's very common to not know whether that's going to be a percentage or an absolute value. He's going to go ahead and open host settings to show us, I think. Okay. So in your host settings file, that's where you're going to define whether that variable is an absolute or it's a percentage. So if it's false, it's not a percentage. It's use max cost percentage false. Okay, then it's not a percentage, it's absolute. If it's true, that number represents a percentage of your TCV. I think it's TCV. Don't quote me on that. So that's what that is. So if you're getting those errors, it says, hey, and max cost, I can't buy because it'll violate my max cost rule. Take a look at that and make sure that's a sane value for you. The DCA enabled, that is after you've made your initial buy. If these triggers were met, if your low BB negative or 15 was triggered and your max cost allowed it, you have bought the pair. It's then going to start looking, it's going to throw that into your pairs tab, and it's going to wait to see if it drops by 3%. Typically, all of these are going to be in percent. I don't think any of the rest of them are ever absolute, other than, isn't there another one in host settings that's absolute?
Min
Go back to
by
host settings.
balance.
Min by balance. Yeah, okay. So those are the only two that will ever switch. Everything else is just always a percent. So you bought it. If it goes down by 3%, what'll happen is it'll throw it into the DCA. And it's really important to understand that DCA is a completely different engine. It is a parallel process running alongside your normal strategy runner. When you look in the console, you'll see normal strategy runner stuff info, and you'll see DCA strategy runner. They're completely separate. That's when you see different variables for each one that are actually kind of duplicated, because each one is doing its own thing. So no, JSON is not JavaScript. It's a different thing. Anyway, so DCA max by spread. That's looking, I believe, to the spread on the order book. I think that's also a percent. And the reason why is because if the spread is too large, if the bid price is 1 Bitcoin and the ask is 3, well, that's signifying there's high volatility in the market, and it may not be a good time to be buying in. You let that bid ask spread close back together before you make your choice. I think the examples are 1, 2, and 3, which are in percent. After 3%, that's kind of crazy. But 1 would be a conservative style number, because you want to wait for that book to be close. Going towards 3, maybe more aggressive, that you just don't care, buying anyway, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's important to say, and this is a request we often see on the chat, because people are confused when they get the message. For one, because the wording on the message is weird, because it says there's not enough volume to buy this coin, which has in no way to do with min buy volume or whatever. This is what people think then. But this relates I'm mixing it up. This is not related to spread. The spread really has its own error message. What I was thinking now is what is that called? The DCA volume on the order book, where it doesn't buy if it's not at least
min buy volume or something. Yeah, this is the one we dealt with the other day, where I was confused because the error made no
now
sense.
It's confusing me completely. So okay, yeah, but what I wanted to say for the spread is basically the same. There will be an error output like can't buy, spread is too big. This is not an error in a sense of you're doing something wrong. It's just the bot doesn't buy for a reason. And as Jared said, 1 is a quite conservative setting, and it's often used on default settings because it's conservative and you won't take people to big risks. So it's just that. So it's just be careful. It's not really an error. So there's no need to change this to avoid these messages. Whatever comes. So be careful, slowly rise it, maybe use 1.5. You could only do half steps there, or even whatever 1.3.
Right.
Slowly raise it and see how it does for you, but don't just raise it to avoid these messages. That's what I wanted to say.
Good. So there's that, and I saw Travis put in the full DCA for that. So, and that's the protection for basically, because it's going to throw off your DCA. If you're doing, let's say, Anderson, or actually any DCA, but if you're doing Anderson where you've calculated out exactly how much money you're going to spend for how many pairs and how many levels, well, the minute you make a purchase where there wasn't enough volume to do your whole DCA, then now you've doubled down, but you didn't really double down because you didn't buy double the amount because it wasn't there. So you think you've DCA'd the full amount, but you haven't, and that kind of throws the numbers off. So if you set this value to make sure that there's enough volume to accomplish your buy, that keeps your numbers cleaner. By all means, you don't have to, but
What Travis put on there, I think they changed the message now. It's clearer anyway. So it previously it was just there's not enough volume, and now they changed it. The trigger that cares about this is the all by available volume trigger. Min by min available volume trigger.
I'd have to go look it up,
Yeah,
to be honest.
something like that. And it went to default to 100% a few versions ago, and this is why this message suddenly popped up, because it was 0 by default, and now it defaults to 100%, means there always needs to be at least the amount you want to buy on the order book, like you described. And you can also set this to 150 to say, okay, I only want to buy if at least 1.5 times the amount I want to buy is on the order book, so I'm sure I get it easily or whatever.
Yep. And obviously the logic there is if you have 1.5 times, that way it accounts for the lag time it takes to actually place the order, get it on the books, and get it filled. If you're at exactly 100%, well, maybe it triggers because there's just enough, and then it goes below like the time it takes the bot to place the order, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's how that works. The next thing, the DCA max buy times. That is one of the ways to limit your DCA process. There are several. You can do DCA max cost. You can do DCA max buy times. And I thought there was another one. Well, I guess the DCA min buy balance would be the third. So those kind of three things in tandem allow you to tell the bot to stop spending all your money. You can disable two and use one. You can use all three. Just be aware that if you're having problems with DCA, it's going to be one of those three things. So the integer there, I lied earlier when I said percent. That's not 5%, right? That's actually 5 times. That's an absolute value. The DCA max cost, that is a percentage, I believe, right?
No.
Is that no? That's just
No.
absolute.
Yeah, that's always an absolute. Unfortunately, it's a bit weird because you could have max cost and min buy volume, everything at percentage, but this stays as an absolute cost. So you enter whatever 0.05 in here, and your whole bag will never cost more than that.
I guess I haven't changed that in a while. Yeah, you're right, because there's no flag for it in host settings, so that makes sense.
And there's it's a usual strategy to either use one or the other, buy times, max buy times or max cost, but you could also easily use both. But you need to do a bit of a calculation. So like, what is my initial cost? If I do 5 DCA, that's about 16 times the initial cost. So your max cost should be in that range, or it doesn't make any sense. So it will never buy 5 times if your max cost is too low. So for most people, it's a bit easier to only have one of each active and the other to 0, but you could use both at the same time too.
Yeah, good point. And that's kind of what we go over too. Like it's easy to get overcomplicated in these things, especially when you're using somebody else's config. So it's better for everybody to just kind of understand what each one of these do, so you can keep it sane and maybe keep it simple. A lot of people have stuff way too much going on. They don't understand why Profit Chiller is not buying. It's because you kind of spaghetti config, right? So anyway, that's good on that. DCA min buy balance, that is the same as the min buy balance for your initial strategy. If it's prefixed by DCA, usually it's kind of doing the same thing that the buy strategy does. It's just the DCA engine running it. So we know what that is. The DCA sell strategy, again, because DCA is a separate engine, it needs to know how to sell on the DCA side, as opposed to if it just sold out of pairs and staying in your normal strategy run. So you can define that there. I think right now it's only gain and something else. There's only 2 exits available. The sell value is the percentage of gain you would want to wait for. And that's the trigger. That's not the absolute thing, because trailing was going to want to kick in. And that's
but be careful about the word trigger there. I mean, this confuses me all the time, and I'm happy he did take it out from the default config, because there's a DCA sell trigger too. you could probably use HiBB as sell strategy, and then you need a value and a trigger because you need an HiBB
Oh,
value,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
you need something like, say, um, yeah, the gain too, because you only want to sell at a minimum amount of profit. So it's a bit
Right.
weird.
So that was so yeah. So using the word trigger was probably somewhat incorrect, but in theory, that's the same thing, right? It is.
Yeah,
That's an entry point. The bot says, okay, I'm ready to sell. Okay, what's the window? And it starts doing that trailing calculation and looking for a better profit.
yeah,
As far as the trailing windows, the trailing buy, trailing profit, I'm hoping that most of you know how that works. That's also a very visual thing for a lot of people. You know, it almost helps to
yeah.
draw
We
out
ag- we
the
agreed
squares.
last time when we did the webinar for LowBB and EMA spread that
Yeah.
trailing is a complete own webinar because it's quite complex to
Okay.
describe, and I probably need to have a day in preparation to draw some presentation up for that.
Yeah,
It's
I can help
kind
with
of
that
weird
too.
to explain. Yeah, we'll do that in one of the next webinars.
Well, you'll see
Um,
that's why I cheat with Inkscape because it's so easy just to draw my translucent squares and tie them together and then drag them
mm,
across a chart instead of trying to do all that in TV. Yeah,
mm.
it's a little cheat, but whatever. Okay, so we'll just gloss over trailing. We'll do that later. Um, so excluded coins, pretty simple, right? If you put it in there, it will just never be configured. The output pairs file, the pairs.properties, will simply not create a config for it, which means the top part of the configured pairs.properties file will be true for that pair. Because it starts out as all trading enabled false, it means that if there's no config underneath that, it will be false. It just will not be traded.
Yeah, and that's when your pair appears in watch mode in your pairs tab in the monitor.
One of them says trailing. Is that a mistake? No, yeah. That's definitely a. You can go ahead and everybody message Metadone right now and tell him he misspelled his config. That's the way it is off the download. I mean, whatever.
Oh yeah, because it's trialing here. Yeah,
It's
I
a
see.
trial to see if you can see it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, that's how it is.
Yeah, I noticed that a while ago. I just never busted his balls on it. Okay,
Well,
so
we're coming to another bug on a neckline then, but yeah, let's do some only first.
okay. Um, Sell only mode coins. Again, those will be when they show up in the configured pairs.properties file, those will just be already enabled to sell only mode. Really, that's if yeah, for stuff you don't want to trade. I guess you could exclude them as well. But
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
useful.
the ones that are here on the default config were in excluded coins previously. But the disadvantage was if you already had them
You
before,
own it. Yep.
you
Yep.
won't ever sell them because they were excluded, and now the bot is still able to sell them, but it won't buy them again.
Right. And some of this is a lot of those are just artifacts from when this was first going on and when we first started demoing this, in October, and Bittrex was delisting coins and stuff like that. So they've just kind of stayed in that list. I mean, you guys can make your own list of the sell only mode if you want. Um,
Yeah,
the next line in
Jake,
that DC, well,
Jacob got it right. They really hate MTL, is what he's saying.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's twice.
it's
Yeah,
up,
yeah, make
it's
sure it's
twice
out.
in there. And but now we're coming to a real big bug because the next line, for
Yes.
whatever reason, Methadone set one pair in there, and actually it should be empty because yeah.
Right. Because
I
people would
guess
say,
you
oh,
will
I just.
you will tell us what it does and why this is stupid to have one in there.
Um, so yeah, if it's in there, if you scroll to the right, look at the text on that comment. It says if there's any coins in this list, only these coins will have DCA enabled. So it's exclusive. It's saying the only DCA I'm ever going to do is F. Screw all the rest of your coins. And so people were wondering why. I've got DCA enabled. The trigger's been hit. It's not going in. And I'm like, I don't know. And I'm looking. I dug around. I spent probably 20 minutes on a guy. Messaged it back to Helmi, and he's like, "Oh yeah." And we went back and forth, and sure enough, we saw here's this. It's by default he had left F in there, so that'll probably be changed in the next upload, right? But for now, just realize that you should probably have that blank unless you really, really want to DCA only specific coins.
I was quite sure there. Oh, okay, it's just a weird naming again. There was I thought it was included coins only, but I think it is enabled coins only. For not only DCA, yeah, it's here on the wiki.
It's both. Yeah.
It's just removed from the default config, so this is the one that's missing here. You could also have enable coins only for your coins overall. So if you only want to trade Ethereum and Litecoin against the Bitcoin market, you would put that line in. I mean, we can copy that over and just have it there to make the section more complete.
What I'm thinking too is as I'm looking at this config, wouldn't it make more sense? Maybe we should get with Chirag and change this so that all of these are logically grouped, because we're bouncing around. We're going down. My next line is going to be, now I'm back to buy values instead of all the buy stuff should be in one line or one section, and all of the DCA stuff should be in another section to keep it logical.
Yeah, we had the discussion quite a few times, also splitting configs into more files or whatever. I mean, what we should probably say is the PD feeder is for one, it's a tool that grew out of a small group of nerds that somehow mingled together and thought about what could go in there. So this is probably why it might look weird at some points. And now since it's public, I guess, beginning of the year or something like that, it's kind of evolving into something more usable and more logical. So these things are kind of about to change every now and then. And yeah, but you're definitely right. Some more logical grouping would be good. I think it's just mostly alphabetic now, but not. I mean, something like max cost is here, but
yeah, you're right.
Also changed name 2 versions ago or something. So yeah, it's somehow changing a lot. So probably a good idea to think about that too.
Well, and to Coder Guy's comment there, there is going to be a config GUI coming. That's going to be phase 1.
Yeah.
And there'll be more GUI stuff later on. So this kind of will be a moot point. You're going to be able to graphically just build your config from a nice pretty little pull down. So that should be kind of cool. But for now, I'm just talking about what we could do to improve this text file as we go. But anyway. So to my point, the next one, this max buy spread, trailing buy, trailing profit, those are all the entry strategies. So this is the same thing we just talked about, just to the entry and not the DCA.
Yeah.
So we don't need to go over those again. Same with min buy balance. Again, that's in a percentage. Well, I forgot what the host settings said on yours, but that's either a percentage or absolute, depending on how it's defined in host settings. Same with min buy price. This is that's absolute. So what's that saying is, I will not buy any coins cheaper than that.
Yeah, that's actually the price in your base currency. So in this case, it's what, 500 or 5,000 Satoshi, probably 500, I guess, huh?
Yeah, 500.
5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah.
8 places. So. And that's. I'll tell you what. There's coins I've made plenty of profit on that were super cheap. You just don't want to get too cheap. If you're in the Doge range, if you're in like the 2 sat price, it's like dangerous because it just makes the charts look really nasty. If you ever try to trade a coin that's only worth 68 sats, you'll see what I mean on a chart. It doesn't scale as well as you need to get in and out. I don't know if it messes the math up anymore. I think the old bot had a problem with that too. You know what I'm talking about there. Not so much a problem now.
It should technically work, definitely. And this again is a value that you could act on in the offset group. So you can do something like, I don't set a min price here, or probably set it even lower, and could do something like, if the price is below that, then lower the max cost by half or whatever. That's something we're coming through later. So.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, like me, if I'm doing it, I'm going to set a min buy price and then just never offset it. because I know about my cutoff where I'm going to trade, from, but obviously that's the beauty of this tool. You can do it however you want. You can start at a value and just offset on other conditions if you feel like that's better for you. So
Yeah.
the point is to understand what it means, and that's kind of what we're doing. So same thing, min by volume. Again, logic there is, hey, don't trade coins that have less than this daily volume. That to me more sense than the actual price, because volume is liquidity. Volume is how you get in and out of your stuff. It means less if you're trading, if your bankroll is let's say you have zero point 0.2 Bitcoin total trading. Well, then, you don't necessarily need 500 min by volume. You could probably deal in the lower end markets if you want. Those tend to oscillate more, but they do have less liquidity. But if you're trying to move, if you're trading 10, 20 Bitcoin, okay, well then you need to stay in the higher end pairs, because what's going to happen is you're going to make a big buy into something that only has 50 Bitcoin daily activity, and then you're going to be stuck with it because the liquidity isn't there to get out of your trade, even if the price is good. You can actually start moving markets at some point if you have enough money.
Yeah, and I mean, in some theory, it's only kind of a part of your overall strategy. So you could say I'm only dealing with the big volume coins because they tend to be more stable or
Sure.
more independent, probably, from what the Bitcoin does.
Well,
so there are theories behind the decision where you go with them in by volume. I think you could narrow it down to be more careful when only trading higher volume coins, and take a bit more risk by only also taking in the lower volume ones. But yeah, basically it's just an element of your strategy.
I mean, that's one way to look at it. I could also look at it as it literally is just liquidity, not safety, because something could be
Yeah.
pumping and have high volume. That doesn't mean it's a safe coin. Doesn't mean
No.
it's not shit, right? So basically, yeah. to me, it's more a function of my bankroll versus what I'm getting into and how can I get out of it. That's 24-hour range, I think, because if it's not defined, it's off 24-hour calls. So
yeah,
again,
it's actually what the exchange says, and this is normally trading volume in the last 24 hours. But this is also a problem, and I mean, we discussed it internally quite a few times, and a lot of users brought it up too, because the volume in the 24-hour volume changes a lot on pumps. So this is really a problem currently, because we're kind of sensible to pumping coins, as they might show up in the big volume range for a little moment, and then you accidentally buy it, and then it drops down again. So I think there's some thoughts made around average volumes and whatnot, and change in volume over days and stuff like that. But yeah, there's nothing ready yet.
It really depends on what can be pulled through the API. I mean, I know the default is 24 hours. I don't know if you can pull per hour and then do your own server-side calcs or not. I don't know that there's a bunch of extra data. There's lots of OHLC data you can pull, but as far as the volume, yeah, that might be a little trickier to do. You might have to
from
pull.
some exchanges you get OHLCV candles, which include the volumes, but yeah, at least you should kind of record the 24-hour rolling volume every hour, so you could at least note the changes. And yeah, but that's probably too much detail now, but at least there's some thoughts made around this.
Yeah, you run into that issue of how much you're gonna store client side. These guys can start running like SQLite databases and stuff. It gets kind of nasty. So yeah. Anyway, on to the next line. The minutes for long. Okay, so this long and short term trend. This is something that that I've been thinking a lot about since this was initially put in, and Metadone and I and Helmi have been talking about it. This is the idea that like Trailer alone only does everything on 24 hours. And so one of the first things we thought about was these sliding windows, and looking at a sliding window of time to make decisions and to do offsets. The older versions, these two values didn't do much because you were essentially just taking two prices. So if it's the minutes for longer term trend, it sets this window, and then you didn't really do much with the window. Now we do. It's a little bit different, and that's further down. So just know that for these two, these are defining a window of time in minutes across each pair's chart. And right
Yeah,
now,
and basically they're used for different things. I mean, we have we use them in the we just come to that in a minute, but in the market conditions, the max top coin average change is taken over this time frame, for example. We have the price trend change below here is taken over the shorter term, and we have some single sections for the longer term too. And then, and this is probably what you're going to talk about, we have the new high-low price percentage change thing that kind of takes both into consideration and
right.
works on that. But
Well,
this is actually definitely something you need to explain afterwards, because I don't really get it until today, to be really honest. So yeah.
but the next point I was going to make was I'm literally begging him to split out the market condition check from these two short and long term trends, because to me I want one variable to determine what my market condition is, and I want the other two to be prepare conditions, because
Yeah.
we're using the short term trend to do multiple things, and it kind of limits your ability to do other stuff. And that's just that's again, like Helmi said, that's a feature of, or what happens when you slowly evolve software, right? Originally it was fine because it wasn't doing anything else, and then you start adding more and more, and then you're like, oh wait, maybe we should split it out. So I don't know how much is involved in that split out. I'm guessing there's probably a little bit of work there, but I think that would be better overall if we can get to that point.
Yeah, but definitely for now, it's kind of. I mean, we're already complicated enough. For the moment, it's probably as simple as both timeframes are used in several places in the
Yep.
config further below, and these are the places to set them. I mean, 60 and 720, which is 12 hours, I guess. Yeah. Is just the default. So set it to wherever you think you want to have your short-term or long-term calculations to be run on.
Yep.
Yeah.
We'll dip back into how there's a few of these that kind of correlate, but we need to get down to the market conditions for that. So max trading pairs, pretty simple. That's literally the full amount of positions you're allowed to have. That is your pairs, that is your DCA, and I believe pending if you've got stuff in
Nothing
pending.
more. No, pending doesn't include
No pending?
pending.
I lied then. Okay, so just DCA and pairs then. Yeah, right, because pending it ignores it. Yeah, pending is the sell order has been created and it gets back to trading. Okay. So that's a way to pretty much, again, a limiter. It's very easy to try to trade too much and you get into 50 different positions, then you're all in at your initial max cost, and now you don't have any money to DCA. And this is a way to kind of have an overall way to make sure you're limiting your positions. And again, this is the starting point. You can offset that later. You could say, if I'm in a bull market, give me more trading pairs because hey, the market's good. Let's spend some money. If the market's super bear, make that number smaller. I want to trade less. Sell strategy, that's for the buy side again, and there's a sell value, which would be where it wants to sell and start looking for trails. The top currencies to check. This, now, Helmi, you know a little bit more about this with the USDT thing, but typically if you're in Bitcoin, this works just fine. This looks to the coin market cap API, checks it does an API call, and says what is the top n number of pairs. How's it been doing in the last 60 minutes?
Yeah.
It looks at the minutes to measure trend.
Yeah, I mean, actually CoinMarketCap is what it was done in the beginning, and I'm not sure, but I think as we're now pulling, I mean, now is quite relative because it's kind of like that for 3 months now or something, but in the early days it was just coin market cap. But I think as we do have nowadays the single prices for each coin for the exchange that we're
Okay.
on, I think it does calculate it really on the value of the exchange
Oh, better. That's better.
information.
Yeah.
So it
I always,
takes
yeah, I always thought the same thing.
the top volume coins, the top 35 in this case, volume coins, and averages their prices and their price. I mean, we're talking about max top coin average change now, which means the change between an hour ago and now on the top 35 coins, and that averaged out. And this is, yeah, what we're coming to next on the market conditions.
Yeah, and he touched that. So be very aware. Anytime you change any one of those three variables, it's a trio. You can't change just one and not consider the output for the other two. So you've got your max top coin average change in the market. It's related to how many currencies you're checking and how often. That's the minutes to measure trend. So keep all three of those things in mind when you're setting market conditions for your offsets.
Hmm.
So that gets you into the whole next section. So you want to
Yeah,
do some of those? I'm gonna go grab something to drink. I'll be right back.
yeah, I can do those. I just wanted to add to the general section as a kind of a general thought. Um, Jared just told you what were your max trading pairs settings, and I mean when I do a new config, and I just did one the other day, so I have that, yeah, close to the front of my brain. This is some basic calculation I do between the trading pairs, the max cost, so the initial spending, and the max I spent on DCA. And I mean, not every pair goes to DCA in the full range, but if you want to always be able to trade and no matter what situation happens, you better be a bit careful here and leave at least a few coins so you could start trading again when the market gets better. So once you run up in a bad market, you could easily back up and have all your pairs in DCA and probably 3 or 4 or 5 levels. So it's better to probably be able, when the market gets better, to quickly raise the max trading pairs by 2 or something and get 2 slots free to use the rest of your coins to get trading again. So always be sure to make a good calculation. Say, okay, how much do I spend initially, and what does that mean? What could one pair cost me when it goes to 5 DCA? And take this value that comes out of that calculation and multiply it by the amount of pairs, and then you say, okay, this would need that many BTC to yeah to enable me to do all the buys. So be sure to have enough balance for that. So that's always a good thing to do a proper calculation there. All right, so I think that's basically it for the general section. I mean, there may be a few more values like the enable coins only thing that we just put in. It's always good to check the wiki for that. If you feel like you're missing something, click the general section here and look through everything that is there. And yeah, if you're in doubt, come to the chat and ask if something could be done that you want to do, and we can check. So the general section, as Jared said in the beginning, is kind of your base layout, your base values for everything. The calculation actually is happening based on all these values and based on what is happening in the market. And this is where the market conditions come in. The market conditions are actually sensor-based condition sets that modify your base values, and this is now the most important parts, for all the coins that are being traded. So everything that happens here in terms of modification is valid for all coins, a bit like the base section. Everything that's coming after that is acting on single coins. So this is the biggest difference from the market conditions there. The market conditions are also well known for their folders. So if you use the default config, it currently has 3 market conditions: bear, boring, and bull. You probably could use someone else's settings or have made up your own. You could have 5 or 7 or 9 or whatever, how many market folders. If you're quite new to PD Feeder, I would suggest staying at only 3 or maximum 5 folders, because everything else is getting really hard to overlook and to see through. It's just easier if you, and I mean, it works quite as well with a lower amount of market folders. There's no real advantage on a bigger scale to have many market folders. This is then just more working on details, and this is probably something you do when you're more advanced.
To all touch on this, the way these triggers work, you want to line them up in order, because they get iterated in order, line by line by line, within this group. So you always want to put your most negative one at the top, because what it's saying is, if my top coin average change is negative 1.5 or lower, it's, I'm laughing about our talk earlier. It's 1.5 or lower.
Just looking up if it's market conditions. I don't know yet. I haven't used it for quite a while. So this is something I wanted to mention, because combined with if you use both, I mean, that's something we're coming to now, because you could have probably things that overlap between your configurations, and like Jared just said, the order of everything is then important to detect which one's coming first. And I just talked to Methadon before webinar to make sure it's still like that and hasn't changed. So this is the reason why the most defensive strategy in default configs usually is on the top. So in this example here, it's bear. It could be super bear or whatever. So the most defensive should go to the top, to always, if in doubt, have this one selected.
Right. Because
so
it goes off the true condition. So that's what he's saying when he says defensive.
Yeah.
What's least likely to be true? You put that first, because you don't want.
We basically have. Yeah, we basically have. I mean, we just talked about the folders. Obviously, the folder name in every section defines which folder the include files are taken from. That's something we come to in a minute. And then we have 2, like kind of sensors that control which market condition is used. We have the min base coin price change, and actually this was initially was the only sensor. So it's, in this case, when we're trading on a BTC market, it's the price change of the Bitcoin that triggers a market. And I think it was around end of last year when kind of this general rule wasn't working so well anymore. And I would say it still is, because about half a year ago, you could easily say when the Bitcoin rises, the altcoins drop, and when the Bitcoin drops, the altcoins rise. But this somehow doesn't work as good as it did before. Jared, would you agree?
Well, it's actually the reverse. I had a quick video where I showed that, where I plotted the 3 lines and showed that in the March to June run, basically Bitcoin rose along with everything else. And my theory on that was that it was a lot of new money coming in, and those people didn't see Bitcoin as a base; they saw it as an alt. So the money came in from the outside and flowed into everything. And then later on, around September, October, that downside, that's when we saw the inverse relationship you'd expect, where Bitcoin up, altcoins down, altcoins up, Bitcoin down, right? So, but what we know through enough history, the past year and a half of trading, is that you can't really depend on one relationship or another. So I would say, as this relates to market shifts, one thing to think about is maybe say, hey, look, if Bitcoin's up or down within 2% in an hour, go to sell only mode or do stuff, as I call it, because you know that if it's one way or the other, like recently, it seems like alts tend to not like it. They don't like the base debate, what they're dominated in, moving too fast. So that's something to think about too. But you can define the either or in each market, or you could throw markets out entirely and just do nothing but pair configs, pair offsets. But it's up to you. It's whatever strategy you wanna implement.
Yeah, so what I wanted to say, because I think this is something people get confused by a lot, the principle that is behind that max and min in both values, and I just laid out something that might probably make sense, but just to explain it a bit. So the min base coin price change defines the minimum value of and minimum in this case means lowest number that should enable this config. So for the BTC price change, this would mean everything that is between negative 0.5 and negative, that's just an arbitrary high number. So whatever is below 0.5 would go into super bear, into bear, sorry, I don't have super bear here. And everything that is above negative 0.5 until positive 2 goes into boring. Everything that is above 2 goes into bull. So it's the other way around, of course, obviously, with the max top coin average change. So this is based on the, like we said before, the top currencies to check and the minutes to measure trend. So this is the percentage that the average of all 35 top coins changed in the last 60 minutes. So between 60 minutes ago and now, to be exact. So it's only measured between two prices. And here is the max. So the maximum, everything that is below negative 1.5 goes into bear. Everything that is between negative 1.5 and positive 0.5 goes into boring. And everything above that, again, arbitrary high number, goes into bull. So this is the basic kind of sensors that define how your market condition is selected as soon as you run feeder. Like Jared said before, it's an or condition. So if either of both, if you use both, gets true, this one gets selected. And yeah, what he also said is that probably the max top coin average change could be 1% positive, even though the Bitcoin is at minus 3%. In this case, the bear folder, the bear condition would be set because it's more up in the config. So the first one has priority, and then the second one, and then the third one. So in case your Bitcoin price changes by 3% positive, but your top coins go to whatever, only 0.5 or 0.2% positive, then the boring folder will be selected because it's more up in the config order. Yeah, so and now you get you have your market condition selected, and what's happening now is that everything that is set in here gets added on top of what you set in the general section. So let's just use this example from the default config. Minus 30 means 30% of the absolute value of the buy value. So in this case, it's 15. Let's just do a quick calculation would be this. So 15 gets to 10.5 because 30% of 15 gets subtracted. This is the minus. The exact calculation is on the wiki, of course, for those of you who want the formula, but the easy way to say is 30% of the value, and that gets subtracted. If it wouldn't be a negative, a minus there, it would of course be added. And then you could just do it like that, and it would end up to be 19.5.
And something else to note too, he does, don't worry about double negative math because
yeah,
that's already ignored.
that's already fixed. We had it way more complicated before, but yeah, it's a bit easier now. Yeah, also the cell only mode would be set to true. So this is one of the cases where no offset happen. It's just set to true. And the cell value would be offset by 20% in this case. But again, just to be clear on that, this is just a default config. Don't think it's a good idea to use these values just because they're in the default config. Make your own mind up. Bring up your own idea on how trading should work for you and set the values to your liking. So this is one part that's happening. I mean, you could have a lot of stuff in there. We also now have the I don't even know where it is, the new buy strategy override. There it is. We could also set a complete different buy strategy for some markets, like let's say for the bull market. So there's a complete section going in there and setting a new buy strategy. Let's say, okay, we had low BB 15 here. Let's probably make it Emma spread, whatever. And the weight is just, you could use this buy strategy block in any of the pair-based overrides too. And the weight defines which gets precedence. So if you put 75 in here and you put 35 on the price trend change, for example, and then whatever happens when both should be applied, then the one with a higher weight would make it to the final config then. Yeah, and I think one of the additionally important things in the market conditions is in opposite to the pair-based overrides, we have these market folders that kind of allow you to import values that are not directly handled by PD Feeder, but still use them for based on a market. I mean, for example, DCA is something that currently doesn't work on a pair level in Profit Trailer. So whatever you do, you couldn't use Feeder to modify your DCA settings on a pair base. You couldn't do, let's say Anderson's strategy on one pair and another DCA strategy on another pair. So, but what you could do is you could modify it on within market conditions. So let's, for example, say be more careful with DCA in a bear market or be more risky in a bull market. What Methadone came up with a few versions ago is this common folder. So this makes it a bit easier. You don't have to have these files in all markets. You could just have your common files in there, and in this case, this is from the common folder, and he splitted the buy triggers out for the DCA configuration into the market folders. So in every market, Anderson buy strategy for DCA gets applied. The double down style gets applied on all. These are just, by the way, plain Profit Trailer configuration values. You could just look them up in the Profit Trailer wiki. And then on the market base, they import different. Let's look at them. Are they even different? No, they're not.
Nope.
Oh, that's mixed up a bit, I guess.
Well, explain why though, right?
I would,
Because
but I don't know.
well, I mean, one
Is
theory is,
Anderson double down? Why is that mixed up?
well, I was just talking about the values, the DCAs, the
Ah, okay,
triggers.
yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, one common thing to think about is, if you're in a bull market, you don't want to have the same triggers you'd have in a bear because the
Oh
whole
yeah,
idea is
yeah, of
to
course.
unload your pairs, right? So if you're in a bull market, you need to have those values lower because things aren't dropping as much. The overall trend is up. And the opposite's true in a bear market. You want to be more conservative with your DCAs. Those values should be lower because you want to wait for things to drop more if the overall trend of the market is bearish. So by default, these are all the same, but obviously go back in and change those. I have yet to see any actual, good data for what those should be set at for every account. I mean, it's pretty much by feel right now. It'd be pretty cool to be able to run some numbers against historical data and say, okay, on average, things drop this. But that doesn't exist to my knowledge. So typically you just make those values higher or lower depending on whatever you want. You kind of
Yeah, and then I mean, if you run something against historical data, it's only that historical data, and it's not the data of the future. So probably it's more, I guess, a kind of trading style thing, how much
hmm
risk you want to take, and I mean, it's the whole bot trading and general trading thing is a lot. I mean, it's on one hand, it's technical analysis, of course, it's acting on indicators, but it's also a lot of how you personally think your trading should happen. Do you take more risk? Do you think this little aspect is more important or less important to you than probably to another guy? So this is probably also the reason why there is no one good config for all, but yeah, probably also an expression of personal trading style, I guess.
Yeah, it's about trend too. I mean, it really
Yeah.
it's not so much about analyzing the data and trying to say that's going to happen again in the future, but I can tell you when the market is trending a certain way, so will the conditions needed to meet certain criteria. So that's the thought behind all these offsets. All of this is all just that. It's what would I do differently in different conditions and automating
Hmm.
that process.
Yeah, so I mean that's it basically for the market conditions. One thing that isn't in a default config could be added. We have I think it's only two versions now that we have a footer folder too that could be added. So you could also add these three text files to a folder called footer, and these will be the values that get inserted on the bottom of the pairs file. In Profit Trailer. And so you would probably ask, why is that? Why should I want that? Yeah, it's just because if you want to set something by hand that should in no way get overwritten by PD feeder, you could use that footer file because Profit Trailer acts on the last occurrence of a variable. So you could probably say something like, whatever PD feeder calculates, I want to have the trailing value for this pair exactly 0.25 ever. Why ever? I can make a reason up why this should be, but this is probably something you could want or probably want to disable a pair manually because you think you mess up your PDFeeder config every now and then put something in a footer file. If it gets included that way, it will definitely be the one taken by Profit Trailer instead of the ones, the config sections for that pair that may come, um, yeah, earlier in the pairs properties file. But then this is probably it for the market conditions. just to sum it up quickly, choose either one or both of min base coin price change or max top coin average change. Decide how you want to go with your market condition selection, and use these values to offset wherever you set before for all pairs. I mean, Jared just talked about that, yeah, you could probably think about when the market changes, I do this and that. Always keep in mind that there's a general market change. So single coins could always behave completely different. I mean, we have a few coins that in the past often behaved against the market, like Ripple did in the past, or Lumen, for example, still a Lumen. Yeah, but market actually is kind of a trend, and especially on big drops or really bull markets, really extreme bull markets, it's highly likely that the vast majority of coins behave like the market trend behaves. So yeah, so this is the market conditions. Anything you would want to add, Jared? Do we forget anything? I guess not.
No, I think that's pretty good. I mean, it's a game of averages, and this is one tool in that war. But like you said, the vast majority of the stuff that this is going to do is per pair adjustments, which is just as important, if not more so, than the overall market condition.
Yeah. And probably what we could add is that the market conditions get announced over the Telegram notifications. So if you set up your Telegram in the host settings, you will get notifications whenever the market config changes, the conditions change. So when PD feeder switches over, you will get notified. All right, so Jared, how about you tell us a bit about single coin offsets, pair-based offsets?
I'd love to, Frank.
Okay, we only have, I mean, probably let's do the example on what's here, and let's talk about what others we have by looking at the wiki later.
And those are pretty simple. I mean, again, we know what volume is. It's basically saying, hey, in this grouping, and one thing to note really quickly is that all of these conditions stack. So if a coin meets the volume criteria, and it meets a price trend criteria, and it meets, downside volatility criteria or whatever, all of those things stack. So that's why it's really important that you set all this stuff. Then go look at your output pairs properties file, because that's the final math output. Eventually, I would like a tool that will do this for us. In the GUI, you make all your configs, and then you can see what it would do in a certain condition or whatever. Don't have that now, but we do have the final output, which is still pretty good. So in this case, it's saying he's adding some conditions in here. So these are also in order. If the volume is 250 or less, or no, that's min, right? What are we at?
I'm just mixing it up
max
here.
Volume.
Yeah, so it's max.
So it's max. So if the volume is between 250 and 500, it's going to be this first condition. If it's between 1,000 and 500, it'd be that middle condition. Or if it's over 1,000, it's that last condition. So everything follows the same logic.
Actually, it's the other way, Jared.
Did I screw it up?
You just explained it for min.
Whatever, dude. All right, just reverse what I just said.
Yeah. Everything below 250 gets the first section. Everything between 250 and 500 there, and 500 and 1,000, and everything above 1,000 would get your default config. So you don't need to cover the whole range in there. You could just say, okay, I just will have my special offsets for that little fragment of the market that I want to have some modifications for.
And it's important to note that only one of these conditions will be true within the grouping at a given time. So you want to. I don't know what happens if do you break it if you put two of the same?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I mean, you could probably. No, you can really. How would you break it?
It would be the first one. If you had two 500s, it would iterate the first one as true. Then that's all that would happen.
Yeah, yeah, probably. And if you put in what 750 in here, it's just logically. I mean, it's in the wrong order, kind of, but it wouldn't matter.
Right.
It will just put it right, and I guess, or
For
maybe
ease of
it's again the first one that becomes true. I
Yeah,
don't know.
if it would try to process that first, and if that's not true, it goes to the next one. That's exactly
Yeah,
what
but
it would do.
it's just, let's sum it up. It's better you don't mess it up.
Yeah. Well, for ease of visibility, when you guys are doing these, yeah, you want to do them in an order that makes sense visually, so you're not wrapping your
Yeah,
brain around why something's not happening.
yeah,
So anyway, so that's the point. We know what that means. Basically, there's a condition and then do stuff. Every single thing
yeah.
follows that same logic. So same thing with price trend change. If you go down to that one,
Yeah. Here
oh,
we are.
there we go. Okay, so this is where those windows come in, and it's saying per coin if it's dropped 5% in the short term. In this case, it's not saying short because it's just implied that it's short. There's minutes to measure trend, and there's also the
Yeah.
longer version.
We have a
Again,
longer term price trend change that
yeah.
actually covers the longer time frame then.
And like I said, hopefully we'll split that out and this will all make a little more sense. But in any case, that same window is looking at the price change. So if basically the coin has dropped 5% in the last hour, just go to sell only mode. Obviously, you can do whatever you want there. You can offset as much or as little as you want on any condition you want. But that's what that's doing there. And the same thing below that, it's saying if it's between a 0.5% rise in a negative 5% drop in the last hour, then do this stuff. So the stuff that you're doing should be logically related to what your trigger is. If I'm allowed to use the word trigger. Your condition, you say, okay, something's dropping, you want to do things with it. You may not want to trade it. You may want to close your trailing windows. You may want to lower your buy value offsets. You may want to lower your sell value. If something's dropping, you're willing to sell it for less because you're like, oh shit, I want to get out, right? So, and again, that's all up to the user. You can do it however you want, but that's kind of the logic for those. And every grouping can have as many of these subsections as you want, or as little as you want, or not at all. You're free to just completely delete sections you don't use. I did that with Metadone's one of his other default configs. I ripped a bunch
And I
of
mean,
stuff out.
we just said it's just a default config and that there's only those two in here, and we just switching over to the list on the wiki, and there you can see there's a whole lot more. We will just talk through them a bit, but yeah, basically remove them if you think I don't want to act on volume. It's just okay to have a min buy volume and that's all. But you could also say, okay, I lower my min buy volume to probably 50 instead of 500. But I said, okay, the lower group from 50 to 250 do get something, whatever. Switch down the DCA enabled a bit lower or whatever you think is good for low volume coins. So, yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, so let's look at that list. Actually, we have volume and price trend change here. So those two that are described here is something we already have covered. We talked about the price before. It's actually the same if you you could also say, okay, the min buy price, I'm going to lower that to 100 instead of 500 Satoshi and do a price offset section and say, okay, until that price, I want to modify the values that I have in whatever way you think is good for a lower priced coin. So probably lower your initial cost or drive down the DCA enable even further, whatever you think is good. Longer term price change is something we just mentioned. It's actually the same than price change, but for the longer of both windows. So it's for the minutes for longer term trend. And we have another new one that just came in with the last big update. That actually has some bugs still. That's probably something that came in from my wish list because I was running 3 exchanges in parallel from one feeder quite early. And I quickly noticed that it's a bit strange to have Poloniex in there with way lower volumes and
Well, maybe not anymore.
less
Poloniex just got,
volatility.
well, so Poloniex just got bought, so they might be
Yeah,
that game might
who
be
knows
changing the
what
same way.
comes and after Binance popped up and got so famous, Bittrex and Bittrex didn't take any new users. They dropped a lot in volume and volatility too. So yeah, I mean these things always kind of change. The crypto world is quickly changing, and this is actually an offset section where you could say, okay, based on the exchange, offset my min buy volume or whatever. But this is a bit buggy. The min buy volume would be the first I would use, and that doesn't work. So probably will be fixed quite soon. But I don't know if it's generally not working or it's just a min buy volume that doesn't work. But yeah, I guess they will have a fix in the coming days for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Jared, I guess this is your time now.
Yeah, this would probably be this would be easier with the graphics. If you guys are really concerned about a deeper explanation, there's a video I made for it. But essentially, what we're doing is we're trying to evolve the usability of these price windows. And as I said before, the initial use of this was, what's the price now, and what was the price n minutes ago, as defined in the price window, which doesn't really tell you much. Knowing the price is 1 Bitcoin now, and 6 hours ago it was 5 Bitcoin, it doesn't tell you anything about what happened in between. So you have to look at what's actually happening in the window. So what we did was said, okay, well, what's a good way to do that? And one of the betas had some math for it, which kind of did this average cost. But I said, well, that's cool to know the average cost, but I still need to know what the cost now is compared to the average. So don't laugh at this math. This is actually, well, that part's okay, but it got a lot more complicated than it really should have been. Essentially, what we're doing is we're saying,
It's still confusing because no one knows what these values
okay,
are.
well, okay,
Yeah,
so I'll tell you.
but we
So
probably don't go too much into that. That I think the covering the basics
yeah, I'll tell you
on
what what that's doing is you're saying, okay, let's say you have a 6 hour window. You have a high price and a low price, a peak and a trough within that range. Okay, variance will be measuring every single candle value and then dividing it by the number of candles you counted. Okay, but so to avoid that, what we're doing is we're saying high and low within a window. We're dividing that by two. We're adding them together and dividing by two. That gives you a line that goes through your window that is the middle range of the prices, the max and the lowest price. And then we're saying, okay, well, what's the price now? And what percentage is the price now varied away from that average? So I know that, now I'm trading X percent above the last 6 hour average, or I'm trading X percent below the last 6 hour average. Even that on its own still doesn't tell you enough to take good action or to even do like market conditions. Um, Ideally, we want to do things like compare the two windows. Let's say we have a short-term range and a long-term range. I can compare those two averages and do stuff. I can say if the average in the last hour is higher or lower than the 6 hour average, is that a condition? Do I want to call that a bear market or a bull market or whatever? The evolution of this hopefully will be to add in some other confirming indicators to set a market condition. So for instance, let's add a piece of complexity to it. Let's say that not only is my current price 10% above the 6 hour average price, but my downside volatility is high, which tells me that we've probably pumped and now we're coming down to a sell side. But if my current price is 10% above the average and I have lots of upside volatility, which we can calculate, that tells me we're still in an uptrend and it's probably okay to buy, even though other indicators might say it's not. So we're kind of in between. Right now, we're not doing window to window comparisons. All we're typically doing, that math right there in the middle, is just saying what is the price now as a percentage of the average calculation of the highest and lowest in the window. I hope that made sense. If it didn't make sense, there's some graphical stuff that I put up that will help.
Okay, I would say it's definitely still complex. I mean, I get the calculation behind it, but I'm not the most experienced TA guy, so probably it's just that I'm missing the correlation between what could I read from that in comparison to yeah, for example, I know, I mean, you basically said what we did so far is just compare two prices, and that doesn't tell us much about what was going in there, but it tells me an easy thing. In the last hour, the price was rising. So whatever I can take from that information, it's just a simple, yeah, as simple as that.
Well, it's almost too simple is my point. I mean, you can't
Yeah,
infer.
I get you. I get you. I mean, yeah, I get you in terms of there's information missing, but I'm still not sure what I could read from the volatility. Let's call it volatility. What comes out? The volatility in one window in comparison to the other bigger window.
Well,
I mean, I know what's coming out there, but I don't know what to do with that.
well,
What to
it
read
depends.
from that.
It depends if you're looking at overall volatility, because overall volatility is a combination of the upside and the downside. But what I'm saying is, if you know there's lots of high upside volatility, it means there's lots of high wicks, means the price is stretching higher but closing a little lower, but it's been trying to rise a lot more in the recent period, and your price is above the average. It's basically the upside volatility is still good, and your price is still good. That means you're uptrending. There's still better ways to do that. Really, Heikinashi would be the way to do it, but we're in discussions if that's going to happen or not, or if it should happen, and where that should happen. It's probably outside the scope of this chat, but there's a pretty good set of indicators we can use to make really good market decisions. We just don't have all those tools implemented just yet. That way. So
yeah,
it's better.
But as we said before, it's getting better. It's being developed constantly. So I guess Feeder has already quite changed a lot between, let's say, 1.2 and now 1.4.
Yeah.
And it has really changed a lot. And yeah, it will get easier. I mean, I read this a few times during the session in the chat that the user interface is hardly needed. Yeah, it is definitely. It's not only the user interface because yeah, it's only some action, whatever. But be sure this is coming. It just takes time. It's not done in a few days. So yeah, we'll definitely come up with that. Before we call this a day, I would probably say let's quickly talk about the upside volatility, the upside downside volatility difference, and the average candle size. Those were, I guess, those are also relatively new offset groups. They were probably added in 1.3. I haven't used upside volatility and upside downside volatility difference a lot, but I definitely have used average candle size. So upside volatility basically is something you just talked about, Jared, isn't it?
Yep. It's essentially the wicks. So you have the OHLC data, so it's the number between the high and the open, I believe. Right? Yeah. If you look at a chart and you see those wicks on the top and the bottom of the candles, it's measuring the size and well, I guess just pretty much the size, but it's calculating all of those together and giving you a percentage change, telling you it's trying to measure how much upside motion there is on a coin. The candle has every candle has a story. If If it's a really small candle, it means there wasn't a lot of price changing in it. If the wicks, if you could have a small candle body but really long wicks, and that tells you there was a lot of variance in that candle time, but between the open and the close, it was very close. So the wicks
Hmm.
kind of give you a better idea of the range of prices within a certain period of time, and you can look at those together, or you can say, well, I want to know just the top side or the downside, and make decisions based on those too. Again, we're getting to the point where a lot of this stuff really needs to be confirming. It's hard to do too much from any one piece of data. You start to have to get to go, okay, well, if this and this, then do this, right? And we're not quite there yet. All the pieces are getting put in. But we gotta figure out if we're going to, if he wants to allow the users to try to combine their own stuff, or if we're going to have certain strategies that already do logical combinations of these different pieces, and then the parameters for each one. But essentially, that's a long way to say what the volatility is. That's literally all it is. If you look on like Investopedia or whatever, you'll see there's a lot more data and visual ways to see what we're talking about. But as a grouping by itself, I don't know how useful that is. I'm not going to say one way or the other, but it's there. It's a tool if you want to play with it and tinker around. If you look at the outputs in your pairs properties too, you can get an idea of what those numbers are in a given period, and that kind of you can start using that and comparing against the price data, and maybe make some choices that way. But they don't typically fluctuate a ton.
I mean, that's
That
probably the most important thing we could just tell for the whole session. Whatever you change, it's always best, at least in the beginning, leave your profit trailer off, let PDFeeder run, generate a config, open that config in your Notepad++ or whatever text editor you're using, and look at it. I mean, look at those pairs, and I mean, there's a lot of comments on each pair block, and they tell you what was the price trend change or the volatility, whatever, in that for that pair, and then see what the settings are that come out. So that's probably the most important part to yeah, when you get used to PDFeeder and try to learn how everything works. And
mhm.
yeah, so
Cool.
everything we now gone through in the wiki is basically the same as we had it before. So everything is just that um, that bunch, that section in the app settings JSON. For everything, the same is true. You can have as many of these configs that you want to have. There's always a value. I mean, it's described on the wiki. Like for example, for the exchange, you could have a config section. I mean, that's basically a bad example because you can't have as many as you want. There are only so much exchanges supported, so this can only be 3, of course. But for example, the downside volatility, use that max change from open as a trigger. Yeah, to enable each of the section and then do a config. What you think should be modified from there. Yeah, and that's it. I mean, this is basically how the app settings file can get really big if you use every one of them. And if you do 2 or 3 configs on each one, that's really making everything big and complicated. But you can have it quite simple. You can lower your market condition settings. You don't need the pair-based offsets at all if you don't like them. Just start as probably minimized as possible to not lose the overview completely. Yeah, that's probably something you could say in general about the app settings. So make it easy in the beginning and then try to find your way in and see what works for you. Be defensive, be careful. It's quite easy to back up quickly, but it's hard to continue trading if you backed up a lot. That's probably the most important and one of the first lessons I learned in bot trading. Don't know how about you, Jared, but yeah,
Well, yeah, we've
that is
learned a
it.
lot over the time. Yeah, and it's still changing. Things are still always evolving. So are the
Yeah.
tools, right?
Yeah.
So do you take audio questions, or how does that work? They just type in, or
No,
what do you do?
we're for simplicity, I guess we're only taking text questions and reading them. We can leave the recording running to include these questions in the recording. So if anyone has questions, if anyone thinks we didn't cover everything they wanted to hear or see, then yeah, probably it's now a good point to ask some questions. We got some questions during the sessions that we tried to answer, and I guess some of them were answered on the chat by either Jared or me, whoever wasn't talking at the time. Travis is also there and answering some questions. Yeah, so but as far as I could see, there aren't really big questions that are still
Yeah,
open, are there?
I don't think so. I mean, let's say, I mean, I've been watching. It's nothing terrible. I guess we're so
Yeah.
good. There's no questions. That's great.
So Ben, yeah, sorry to disappoint you. No get rich quick settings today.
Oh, we do have
Um,
Lambo mode. There are Lambo settings. We just don't share
yeah,
those with
we're not
all of
going
the
to tell
rest.
you them about Lambo mode today. We do that in the paid webinar later.
Right.
Rui, babysitting the bot is difficult for me. Yeah, probably. I mean, PD Feeder actually is an instrument to let you relax on that side, to not have you babysit a lot. So it's probably yeah, just something you need to figure out how a good and safe strategy for you works. And again, as we said before, this is very much depending on what risk you're going to go, and yeah, you could totally get up some careful settings on PD Feeder and don't need to touch a lot at all. But then, of course, this makes you less profit even in good days. So it's always a trade-off. Yeah.
So
Um, yeah,
Jacob had a
Jared, you probably wanted it. Want to answer that?
yeah. I'll jump in on that one. So that's a pretty open question, right? What buy strategy do you prefer? And really, that that kind of comes down to what market we're in. And there's some overall consensus, I think, on certain strategies over others. This meaning that there are going to be some strategies that work better in a bull and some that don't. And the reason why is, for instance, if you're doing any of the negative strategies, low BB -10, or EMA spread that's -5, or whatever the number is, right? Those work well in a sideways or downtrending market because the coins are doing just that. They're bouncing around. They're in trading channels, and if it's more of a bearish side, you're going to see things dropping more often. Sometimes sell-offs happen, and you're picking up those deals. But if you're in a bull market and you're still running the same negative EMA spread, for instance, you're still going to pick up the deals when they show up, but those are going to be fewer and far between. And what you're going to end up with is your neighbor is going to be going, dude, I'm making 8% a day, and you're like, well, I'm only doing 8 trades. What's going on? Why is my stuff broken? Well, it's not broken. There's just less of those deals available. So in a bullish market, you might want to use something more like a positive EMA spread, or even an EMA cross. But as I think Helmi and I talked about that before, the cross has an issue with only buying once on the crossover. But you want to do something like maybe a higher low BB, or even high. I've seen people trade off high BB, high BB entries.
Hmm.
You could do a low BB that's closer to the middle of the band, right? So because it's all percentage based, if you're like a low BB 40, for instance, you're going to get more buys than you would on a negative spread. So you want to tailor your offsets and your settings to match what the market's trying to give you. If the market's bullish, you want bullish settings. You want to start spending more money, DCAing probably less because you want to save that capital for other entries. Conversely, if the
Yeah,
market's going down, you
actually,
want to do the opposite.
yeah, actually, I think this is something you really need to add. I mean, it's named by strategy, but when we talk about what is your strategy, I would also always include everything around that. I mean, using low BB is only a name. I mean, it's a
Sure.
big difference if you do low BB 30 or low BB minus 10, and
Right.
and then it's again a difference if you do Anderson DCA 5 levels between minus 0.5 and minus 2, or if you do 3 levels between minus 3 and minus 7. So the overall strategy always is your how many pairs at one time, how many DCA levels, how aggressive is your buy strategy, either in what Jared just said, if you're buying on an uptrend or on a downtrend, or if you're going low conservative values. And I mean, a good friend of mine is running a bot with low VB0 for months now. He's not always doing good, but in a not bad market, he's doing his trades and he doesn't have to look at it at all. So yeah, it's probably not the most profitable strategy, but it's kind of a down-tuned, kind of working in 80% of the cases strategy. And in a time where it's not working, it's still running. And I mean, we're in cryptocurrency, so most of the time the coins will come up finally, somewhen.
Yeah.
We don't know when, but yeah, on the long run, you're usually not losing money. So if you're
Here's
not
here's
buying completely silly.
here's the way I would break this whole thing down. If you're just trading with just profit trailer, you have a choice to make. Your settings have to be either aggressive for a bullish market, or they need to be conservative for a bear market, or overall, you're typically not changing your settings very often. So if you decide to go more conservative, when the market goes bull, your neighbors are making more money than you are. But when the market goes bear, you're losing less money than your neighbors are because they're aggressive and bagged up. The whole point of feeder is being able to have your cake and eat it too. You should be adjusting your strategies to be more aggressive when the markets are going good and be more conservative automatically when the markets are going down. That gives you the best of both worlds. You're spending more money when the market demands it, and you're saving more money when the market's not giving you profit. That's the easiest way to see how this whole thing is set up and why it even exists.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I mean, there is we said that multiple times on the chat and in previous webinars and whatever. There is no one good strategy. It's always the market, it's the coin, it's the volatility, it's whatever. There's so much that plays into that. Um, you need to kind of, yeah, I mean, it's like cooking. You need to find the spices in a good combination. There's no way to just use pepper and make any dish right. Yeah, you just would probably just taste ugly. So you need to find the right ingredients for whatever you think should come out. Um, and PD Feeder supports you in that and tells you, okay, you gotta tell me what I should do when this and this happens, and this is something what PD Feeder does for you, and works quite well actually if you do it right, and if you find it right. And of course the market does weird things again, and you probably will end up thinking new or thinking different. But yeah, I mean, actually that's the fun in trading.
All right.
All right. So as far as I can see, we don't have any real questions, and I mean we're already over 90 minutes now, so probably let's end this at that point. I will definitely stop the recording now, and yeah, I would thank you all for coming, and thank you, Jared, for joining us and giving us some good explanations on how to configure feeder. Thank you.
You're the pilot, Bubba. I'm just chilling in the chair.
Oh God, thank God we're not really flying, because that's something I wouldn't be able to do. All right, guys. So yeah, thanks again for coming, and thanks again for rocking this, and we'll see you soon, hopefully, on the next webinar. Until then, have a good day.
How are you?